Most people check their blood pressure, see two numbers, and have absolutely no idea which one is actively working against them right now. And here's what makes this genuinely dangerous. Your doctor may have told you your reading is manageable, without ever explaining that for someone your age, one of those numbers is doing far more damage than the other. They gave you a number. They didn't give you a framework. Imagine this. 7 days from now, you sit down, put on your blood pressure cuff, and for the first time in years, you actually understand what you're looking at. Not just the numbers, but exactly what they're telling you about your arteries, your heart, and your risk. Right now, today, you know which number demands your attention first. You know the specific lifestyle shifts that target it. And you know the one hidden risk factor that can make everything else in this video irrelevant to your situation. That's what we're building today. A complete protocol. Not general advice. A structured, evidence-based system for understanding and acting on both numbers in your blood pressure reading. But right now, most of you watching have been measuring blood pressure for years without truly understanding the fundamental difference between the top and the bottom. And I don't blame you. Nobody explained it properly. Your doctor said, your pressure is high, handed you a prescription, and sent you on your way. The top number and the bottom number come from completely different biological processes, carry completely different risks, and demand completely different responses. There is one critical factor that determines which of your two numbers is your most urgent threat right now. I'll reveal it in the middle of this video. And if you leave before we get there, everything else I share today will be only half as useful to you as it could be. Let's start at the beginning. When your heart beats, it contracts and pushes blood out through your arteries with force. That moment of maximum pressure, that's your systolic reading, the top number. Then, between beats, your heart relaxes and refills. The pressure in your arteries drops to its lowest point. That's your diastolic reading, the bottom number. So when you see a reading of 120/80, what you're actually seeing is this: 120 millimeters of mercury of pressure when the heart fires, and 80 millimeters when the heart rests. Two numbers, two different snapshots in a single cardiac cycle, and critically, two very different stories about your cardiovascular health. Here's what to do today before anything else. Take your blood pressure 3 times in a row, with the 1-minute rest between each measurement. Write down both numbers every time, then calculate the average. That average is your actual working blood pressure, not the single reading you glanced at last Tuesday morning while still half asleep. Most people take one measurement, see a number, and either panic or relax. Neither reaction is appropriate, based on one data point. The average of 3 consecutive readings, taken properly, is where the truth lives. Write those numbers down. You'll need them in about 4 minutes. Think about what we just established. One biological process, 2 snapshots. One tells you about effort, one tells you about recovery. Blood pressure is unique in that way. It gives you a 2-channel signal where most vital signs give you 1. The question is whether you know how to read both channels correctly, for your age, for your specific physiology. Now let's talk about the top number, systolic pressure. After the age of 50, the single biggest driver of elevated systolic pressure is arterial stiffness. Your arteries, especially the large ones like the aorta, are lined with elastic fibers that allow them to expand when your heart pumps and recoil between beats. Over decades, those elastic fibers break down and get replaced with stiffer collagen tissue. The artery becomes less like a flexible rubber tube and more like a rigid pipe. This isn't a sudden shift. It's gradual. Each year, the proportion of elastic fibers decreases slightly, and the proportion of collagen increases. The process accelerates under chronic stress, with persistently elevated blood sugar, and in the absence of regular aerobic exercise. What you eat, how you move, and how you sleep are not peripheral factors here. They are directly shaping the composition of your arterial walls every single day. Think about a man named Robert, 63 years old. He came to me with a systolic reading of 162 and a diastolic of 78. His own doctor had told him the bottom number looked fine. What nobody had explained was that for someone his age, that top number alone represented a substantially elevated risk of cardiovascular events, regardless of what the bottom number was doing. He had been focused on the wrong channel for years. That's the kind of gap this conversation is designed to close. When the arterial wall stiffens, the pressure spike during each heartbeat becomes more dramatic. There's nowhere for the arterial wall to absorb the mechanical force. So the systolic number climbs, sometimes significantly, even when the diastolic number stays perfectly normal or even decreases. This is why isolated systolic hypertension is the most common form of elevated blood pressure in people over 60. And it carries serious, well-documented consequences: meaningfully increased risk of heart attack, stroke, angina, and progressive kidney damage. Research tracking patients over a 20-year period showed that every 10-point increase in systolic blood pressure above 140 was associated with a 15 to 20% increase in cardiovascular events. Not the bottom number, the top number, the one that, for years, doctors told older patients not to worry too much about. So what can you actually do about arterial stiffness? Two things with strong, consistent evidence behind them. First, potassium from whole foods. One whole avocado contains roughly 900 milligrams of potassium, about 20% of what your arterial smooth muscle tissue needs each day to maintain proper function. Fatty fish, salmon, mackerel, sardines, provide potassium along with omega-3 fatty acids, which have been shown in multiple clinical trials to directly improve arterial elasticity. Sweet potatoes, white beans, cooked spinach. These are not exotic or expensive foods. They are ordinary foods that most people simply aren't eating in sufficient quantity. A medium sweet potato delivers over 500 milligrams of potassium. A cup of cooked white beans delivers over 1,000 milligrams. These numbers matter because the average dietary potassium intake in men over 50 typically falls well below the recommended 4,700 milligrams per day. Most men are getting roughly half of what their arterial tissue actually needs. The mechanism is not complicated. Potassium helps your arterial smooth muscle cells relax. Relaxed arterial muscle means lower systolic pressure. This isn't a supplement you buy, it's food you eat. And the difference in outcome between someone who consistently meets their dietary potassium needs and someone who chronically falls short is measurable in blood pressure points over months, not years. Second, consistent cardiovascular exercise. 30 minutes of moderate aerobic activity, 5 days per week, has been shown in repeated studies to reduce systolic blood pressure by 8 to 14 points over a 12-week period. That is clinically comparable to what many low-dose medications achieve. Not because exercise is magic, but because your arteries literally become more elastic with regular aerobic load. Use it or lose it applies to your vasculature exactly the same way it applies to your muscles. The type of exercise matters less than the consistency. Walking, cycling, swimming, rowing, any sustained moderate aerobic effort produces the adaptation. The key phrase is moderate intensity. You are not trying to sprint. You are trying to sustain a pace where breathing is elevated, but conversation is still possible. That range, held consistently 5 days per week, is where the arterial remodeling happens. Here's a simple image I want you to hold on to. Think of a brand new garden hose. Squeeze it, it expands, it bounces back cleanly. Now think of a hose left in the sun for 15 summers. Squeeze it, it barely moves. It has lost its give. That is your aorta after decades of low dietary potassium, chronic unmanaged stress, and a sedentary routine. The goal of everything in this protocol is to give that hose some of its flexibility back. And here is the part that gives most people genuine hope when they understand it fully. The process of arterial stiffening is not a one-way street. Research from the last decade has demonstrated measurable improvements in arterial elasticity in patients who adopted consistent aerobic exercise and dietary intervention, even in their 60s and 70s. You are not simply trying to slow the damage. You are potentially reversing some of it. It is possible. The research is unambiguous, but it requires consistent input, not occasional effort. Now, before we move to the bottom number, I told you there's one critical factor that determines which number is your biggest threat. We're almost there, but I need you to understand the diastolic picture first, because without that context, the factor I'm about to reveal won't fully land. Here is where blood pressure conversations most commonly fall short. The diastolic number, the bottom one, tells you about the pressure your arteries are under during the rest phase between heartbeats. When that number is chronically elevated, your vascular system never fully decompresses. There is constant, persistent tension in the arterial walls, even when your heart is not actively contracting. The system is always partly under load. Now here's what makes this particularly dangerous, especially for people under 50. Persistent elevated diastolic pressure puts ongoing mechanical stress on the walls of your largest blood vessels, including the aorta. Over time, this chronic stress weakens the arterial wall from the inside. The layers of the arterial wall, which are normally tightly bonded and structurally sound, begin to show fatigue under the relentless pressure. Think of bending a metal rod back and forth repeatedly. Each individual bend may not be catastrophic, but over thousands of repetitions, the metal fatigues and the structural integrity is compromised. And this creates one specific, serious risk that doesn't get nearly enough attention in general health conversations. Abdominal aortic aneurysm. An abdominal aortic aneurysm is a bulge that forms in the weakened wall of the aorta as it runs through the abdomen. It develops slowly, over years. It is almost entirely silent. No pain, no obvious symptoms in most cases. You can have one developing right now and feel completely fine. And if it ruptures, survival rates drop below 50% even with immediate emergency surgery. This condition disproportionately affects men. It disproportionately affects men who have spent years with elevated diastolic pressure. And it is almost entirely preventable when identified and managed early. I want you to sit with that for a moment. Not to frighten you, to motivate you. Because motivation is only useful if it leads to the right action. So what specifically targets the diastolic number? 2 interventions with the most consistent evidence: stress management and sleep. Before you mentally file those under soft advice, hear the mechanism. Chronic psychological stress, the low-grade, background kind that most men over 40 carry, activates your sympathetic nervous system continuously. When that system stays chronically active, your body maintains elevated vascular tone. Your blood vessels stay partially constricted even at rest, even during sleep. The result is a diastolic number that stays elevated around the clock, not just during stressful moments. A study published in the Journal of the American Heart Association followed participants for 4 years and found that those reporting high levels of persistent occupational stress had diastolic readings averaging 6 to 8 points higher than their low-stress counterparts, independent of diet, exercise, and medication status. 6 to 8 points from stress alone. That is not a small number when we're talking about sustained arterial wall pressure over years. The practice here is not vague mindfulness. It is any structured daily activity that activates your parasympathetic nervous system for at least 20 minutes. Slow breathing exercises, a walk without your phone, deliberate stillness before bed. Whatever the form, the physiology is the same. You are shifting from sympathetic dominance to parasympathetic dominance, and your diastolic pressure will respond. And sleep. 7 to 9 hours consistently. People sleeping under 6 hours per night show consistently higher diastolic readings than those sleeping 7 or more. Sleep is the only window in your 24-hour cycle when your parasympathetic system fully dominates. Cut that window short, and you cut short the only natural decompression your arterial system gets. Your arteries need those hours. They use that time to restore tone, regulate inflammatory signals, and reset vascular sensitivity. Shortchanging sleep is not just a fatigue issue. It is a blood pressure issue. For someone in their 40s with a diastolic reading that climbs above 90, consistent sleep may be the single highest leverage variable in the entire picture. More impactful, in some cases, than dietary changes alone. Let me bring the full picture together before I give you the critical factor: potassium-rich food and aerobic exercise for the systolic number. Stress reduction and consistent sleep for the diastolic. That is a complete protocol, not a partial fix. It costs nothing except consistency and intention. All right, here is the factor I promised you: your age. If you are under 50, elevated diastolic pressure is your primary concern. The persistent wall stress, the risk to your aortic integrity, the vascular fatigue from chronic load. These mechanisms are most consequential in younger arterial tissue that still has tone and elasticity, but is being chronically overworked. If you are over 50, dominant systolic elevation becomes your primary concern. Your arteries have already lost some of their natural elasticity. The pressure spike during each heartbeat carries greater mechanical impact on a stiffer system. The cardiovascular risk, heart attack, stroke, kidney damage, scales more directly with systolic elevation in midlife and beyond. This is not a matter of opinion. This is the medical consensus shift that has occurred over the last 2 decades. For a long time, physicians considered diastolic pressure more clinically significant. Elevated diastolic was the serious concern. High systolic in older patients was often described as an expected feature of aging, something to keep an eye on, but not the primary target. That view has been completely overturned by large-scale, long-term outcome research. Current clinical guidelines now place systolic pressure as the primary driver of treatment decisions for patients over 55. Not because diastolic stopped mattering, but because systolic, in that age group, more accurately predicts cardiovascular events. If your doctor hasn't had this specific conversation with you, this video is that conversation. Now, about medication. Because a significant portion of the people watching this are currently on blood pressure treatment, and I want to address that directly. Blood pressure medications, ACE inhibitors, beta blockers, calcium channel blockers, diuretics are effective. They lower the numbers. They reduce cardiovascular risk. For many patients, they are absolutely the right tool, and I fully support their use when clinically indicated. But here's what the research consistently shows. Medications reduce cardiovascular risk. They do not eliminate it. Even patients with well-controlled blood pressure, managed pharmacologically, retain measurably higher cardiovascular risk than people who have never had hypertension at all. The gap between control with medication and naturally within normal range is real, and it is clinically meaningful. That gap is partially but significantly bridged by the lifestyle interventions we discussed today. Medication and lifestyle are not alternatives. They are a stack. Both together produce better outcomes than either alone. If you are on blood pressure medication and not addressing the 4 lifestyle inputs, potassium, aerobic exercise, stress management, sleep, you are treating the reading but not the underlying process. The medication is managing the output of a system that continues to be driven toward hypertension by your daily inputs. That matters. And closing that gap is entirely within your reach. Here is the complete daily protocol in practical terms. In the morning, within the first 2 hours of waking, eat 1 potassium-rich food: avocado, banana, sweet potato, sardines. Choose one. This is not a dietary overhaul. It is one addition that your arterial tissue will use directly. If you want to go further, pair it with a handful of leafy greens. Cooked spinach in a morning omelet contains more potassium per serving than a banana, and it adds almost nothing to your meal prep time. During the day, 30 minutes of aerobic movement at moderate intensity. You should be able to speak in short sentences, but your breathing is noticeably elevated. That zone, held consistently, is where arterial elasticity improves. If 30 minutes feels like too much right now, start with 15. 2 15-minute walks produce nearly the same vascular benefit as 1 30-minute session. The biology doesn't care about the format. It cares about the sustained aerobic demand. In the evening, 20 minutes of deliberate nervous system decompression. No screens. Slow, controlled breathing. 4 seconds in, 6 seconds out. Something that signals to your body that the workday is finished and the recovery phase has begun. This directly targets your diastolic baseline. Some people find a short, low-intensity walk works equally well. The form is yours to choose. The outcome, a meaningful shift toward parasympathetic dominance, is what matters. At night, protect 7 to 9 hours of sleep. Treat it as a clinical prescription, because physiologically, it is. If you are consistently sleeping under 6 hours, no other intervention in this protocol will deliver its full benefit. Sleep is not recovery from the day. Sleep is when the most important cardiovascular repair work happens. That is 4 inputs. 2 targeting systolic, 2 targeting diastolic. Completely sustainable, completely evidence-based, completely within your control, starting tonight. Now I need to tell you something that applies to roughly half the people watching. And getting this wrong is the most common error I see in otherwise motivated, health-conscious people. Everything in this protocol works, but for a meaningful portion of you, these changes alone would not bring your numbers into the optimal range on their own. And if you assume they will, without continued measurement, without checking in with your physician, you are making the exact assumption that leads people to think they're fine when they aren't. 3 situations where the lifestyle protocol must be paired with the medical conversation immediately. If your systolic consistently reads above 160, Lifestyle intervention alone is unlikely to move you to safe territory fast enough. A combined approach is necessary. If your diastolic consistently reads above 100, the aortic wall stress we discussed is occurring right now at an accelerated rate. That warrants medical evaluation, not lifestyle optimization alone. And if you have any history of kidney disease, diabetes, or a previous cardiovascular event, your blood pressure targets are more aggressive than general population guidelines. A reading that is high normal for someone without those conditions may be genuinely dangerous for you. Your physician needs to set your specific target number. This is not optional. This is the clinical reality for that subset of patients, and it applies regardless of how disciplined your lifestyle has become. Here is the error I most want you to avoid. You learn the protocol, you implement it, your numbers improve, and you conclude the problem is solved. So you stop measuring. Without consistent monitoring, you have no feedback system. You have no way of knowing whether the improvement held, plateaued, or reversed 3 months later. Measure your blood pressure consistently, every week, same time of day. After 5 minutes of seated rest, log both numbers. That data is your dashboard. Without it, no amount of lifestyle discipline gives you the information you actually need to make good decisions. The cuff is not optional equipment. It is the feedback loop that makes everything else in this protocol meaningful. Let me leave you with this. Your blood pressure reading is a 2-channel signal. One channel tells you about your heart's effort. The other tells you about your vascular recovery. Each channel speaks more loudly at different stages of life. And understanding which one to prioritize right now is not optional. It's the difference between treating your actual risk and simply treating a number. Under 50, protect that bottom number. Manage the persistent wall stress. Give your arteries the decompression they need. Over 50, make that top number your primary focus. Keep the arteries moving. Keep the potassium coming. Keep the aerobic load consistent. Both numbers matter. Both numbers respond to how you live. The evidence on this has never been clearer, and the tools to act on it have never been more accessible. You do not need a specialist, a supplement stack, or an expensive program. You need the 4 inputs we covered today, applied consistently, measured regularly, and adjusted based on what your readings actually tell you. The window to act on them is now, not after the next reading surprises you. Quick question before you go. When you check your blood pressure, which number do you instinctively look at first? The top or the bottom? Write it in the comments. I read every one of them, and your answers genuinely help me understand what to cover next. A lot of people watching right now are confused about exactly this distinction, and knowing where you stand helps me be more useful to you. And if you want to go deeper on the dietary side, specifically how to use food to move your systolic number without relying solely on medication, I covered that in detail in another video. The link is in the description.